We're here. We made it. We arrived. The final episode, part 9 of Masters of the Air, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and reactions to the final episode right after the jump. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. Part 9 of Masters of the Air is here, and generally acts as a swan song. I mean, it should. It's the culmination of the war, but in cinematic form. I think my issues with this series have been that it was very front-loaded with a lot of the aerial battles, a lot of the fights, and then a lot of the stuff for the war, and a lot of the good dramatic pieces. The Quinn episode was sort of the high point, the high bar, and then I think it subsequently got lower. And we've just spent a lot of time dealing with the POWs and Stalag, and I know that is where the crux of, I guess, these folks, the surviving members of this war, I guess this is where the crux of their books took place or told their story, but it doesn't really present for good television, considering that I think, for me, the most interesting character was Rosie. And we don't get that much of him in the last couple episodes, and we don't get his full story. I will say this, at least this episode does spend a little bit more time with Rosie, and we sort of begin and have a couple of character beats that I think, based on the information that we get in the cue cards, which I love a good cue card at the end of the series, about the actual people, sort of explains what Rosie went off to do as he got up there in life and continued on. This episode begins with the D-Day has passed, and so the war is coming to its last few days. And so it's a lot of one, informing the Germans that the war is coming on the last few days and getting them to sort of cease fire, decease, do things, hold up their end of a truce that is forthcoming. But basically, we see that they are closing in on the Third Reich from all sides, from air, water, from everywhere that they can. They're closing in. The Germans are starting to lose this battle, and so we had a voiceover where Rosie is saying, like, they were at this point in time the true masters of the air. There was nobody else out there in the air but them. They were controlling the skies. They were doing what they could, but because the Germans had not fully been truced or told to take a truce or to kind of give up, they're holding on and giving up those last few fights, that last nagging deep breath. And so when they have these folks going in the air, every now and then you'll see a rocket come up and tag a plane or tag a plane here and there. That's what happens here. The plane that Rosie is in gets tagged and eventually goes down. Now, he is trying to save the plane and keep everybody on board so that he can get it past basically the border. He wants to get on the other side of the Russian line so that he can be with allies as opposed to be on the side that the Germans are on. And so he's planning, they've taken some stuff. It's very compromised, the plane that he's got going, but he's going to do everything possible to get them through. His co-pilot, who's directly in the seat next to him, he's like, all right, cool, this is now the time to eject. He gets him out. When he's about to eject, he notices that the back folks in this plane were already dead. They didn't make it out. And so the purpose of getting the plane to a safer spot was really just for him. He ejects and he lands on the east of the Oder River, which is the exact border, sort of the in-between spot between Germany and Russia. And he's injured, so he lands in a bad way. And he's trying to find safety so that he can kind of get his bearings. He knows he's in the middle, but he can't quite make out who's on what side. Because they're all sort of dressed and everybody's just firing at each other, and it's getting dark. It's pretty much you can't make anything out. And so he sees a point where someone is giving themselves up, and then they are murdered on the spot. And so he doesn't know what the hell's happening. And so he goes back in, and some military folks come above him, and he puts his hands up. It's like, I'm American, because at that point in time, he does recognize that these folks are Russian allies and not with the Germans. So he gives himself up and says, I'm American, and they take him in, realizing that he is with them. So he happened to land in a place with allies, whereas we've seen what happened with Quinn, Bucky, they did not. back in the Stalag with Buck and Bucky, the SS, they're closing ranks. At this point in time, the POWs are in a bad way because the SS are basically saying that they need to move. They need to keep on the move because the Russians and allies of the Americans are coming into a place so close. They're nearby, and so because they're so close, they have to stay on the move. And so they tell the POWs at that point, "You guys got 30 minutes to get to the gate and clear what it is you want to take. We got to be on the move." And so they have to start this march from one Stalag to another to stay ahead of the Russians. That's sort of their goal. I'll say this: any good treatment that they had ever received before, there is a sort of an understanding that happens between the lead that's over the American piece of the POWs and the German. Like they have a sort of an understanding, and there's a little bit of a respect level that's given at least to the head prisoners. But overall, they're getting more forceful with them. They're getting more aggressive with them because they realize that the stranglehold that they had over them is disappearing. They're not going to just buck the system anymore. That these people are starting to feel like there's hope, and so they have to crush that hope. They have to be overbearing and like tell them to shut up, call people out of their names, do everything. Tell people by their names, but they can't understand it anyway. But that's what they have to do to sort of try to regain some type of dominance over the situation. But we see Cross's return back from his R&R, and we get some news about that later. But he looks a lot more alive in the face and a little bit more about his business. And there's a situation you can kind of tell he's a little bit more about this. There's a situation that occurs where some pilots who are about to go up in a plane can't get into the equipment room to get parachutes to have so they go up, and because the doors are locked. And so the person that is in charge of that is off gallivanting, having fun, chilling, telling stories, kikiing with other officers. When Cross comes in there and checks him, like, "Hey, I don't want that equipment door to close um, before anybody's going up in the air, and not to close until 30. You're supposed to be in charge of that, manning that till at least 30 minutes after they take off." And he's pretty aggressive. For the first time you saw that, Cross was sort of the man in charge. And while the guy didn't originally respect him, I think the ranking and the way that he came at it, he realized he was also in the wrong. Cross went back home and got a little bit of balls on him, which is good to sort of see. We go back and we start seeing that the POWs and the German soldiers are also being affected by the weather that they're seeing. They're going through deep and cold winters and super snows in Germany, and the officers are also being affected. And in that, we see an officer who has a moment where he falls and kind of is like in a bad way, gun falling off. He can't even hold that. And one of the POW officers, who we find out is Jewish, helps him up, props him back up, holds his weapon for him, like he makes sure that he is okay, so that he can continue on this trek. Because nobody this trip, while they are trying to keep ahead of the Russians, they're doing themselves a disservice too, because they're not in the best way. They have to take these breaks. They have to take these moments to get some type of rest or solace or warmth, because they can't continue on just like they don't. The POWs are being ravaged by this as well. In this path, there's a moment where they have to clear the path where German tanks are coming by. And it's a sad moment for the Germans in that one of them, I think, he does a Heil Hitler stance, and there's no response. And one of the officers just says, "What the hell? There's nothing but children and old men on those tanks," which for him is sort of a sign that all hope is lost, because we're now pulling in the drag. Like, we've lost all of our other men. Everybody else is dead. This is all we got left to put out kids and old men. And that's not really, we've got nothing. If that's what we're being represented by, we're going to lose this. And by this point, the writing's on the wall. They make their way to a factory, a brick factory, in Moscow, Germany, and get a little bit of warmth before they are then carted off to a train, which the train takes them to the heartland of the fatherland in Germany, like deep in the heart of enemy territory, to another Stalag. In this, though, Buck and Bucky have a little bit of conversations like, I would not have, would you have done this any different way? They're both kind of like, no, I wouldn't have. I may have done this and this, but I wanted to get up in that plane. But they both said that they would not have been able to do any of this without the other. Like everything that they've done, the road is would be a lot rougher if the other wasn't there. So it just shows you the connection, and the two of them, they are yin and yang, each other's yin and yang. They arrive at the newest Stalag. I think it's Stalag like 13 or something like that. I think that's what the name of it is. It gets hard to keep track of all these Stalags. We see up to 3 or 4 different versions in this episode. But there, Buck finds a familiar face in George, who he has met before. Didn't know Bucky. They introduced, so there's a little bit of camaraderie there, another familiar face. This episode feels a lot like we're just tying up ends. We're just getting to the ends of the stories, and it doesn't feel like much character stuff occurs. For a drama, you either need to have a lot of action if you're going to be that action drama, or you need to have a lot of heartfelt character moments. And for the most part, this episode really doesn't have either, but it does for Rosie here. The next piece that happens with Rosie is pretty heartfelt, and sets him off on to become the man that he grows up to be. But here, we see a pretty brutal discovery of what these Germans did to folks in these towns, in a twofold way. We want to visually see what occurred. We see the bodies charred. We see tons of Jewish folks burnt to a crisp. Some hung but behind and sort of killed in that manner. Jewish were the majority of the people killed. There were some Russians and some Polish folks that were also killed in this manner as well. But for the majority of it, the Nazis killed Jewish folks. And it's nothing's really said in the sequence. It's just us seeing it through the eyes of Rosie, and it's a hard watch. And then one of the officers comes and tells him, like, yeah, who these folks were and what all was, and it sort of hits Rosie. He's kind of in a way, and I think he was naive. He knew what he was doing. He knew he was fighting on the side of the Americans and trying to abolish and stop whatever the Germans were doing. He heard about what the Germans were doing. This is the first time that he actually physically got to see it, and I think it broke him and made him a different person. The path that he went on. There's also a point when he's about to take a plane to go back to the base. He's getting ready to go. He's at the plane base, waiting for his flight to take off. And there is an older gentleman off to the side that he kind of just wants to, he's shooting a shit with. And he asks him, like, real quick, what are you going to do after this? Like, where are you headed to now? You're going to spend it with family. And there's a young girl next to him who has to be his translator because he doesn't know any American. And he lets him know that all his family is dead. Wife, his kids, grandparents, anybody that was associated with him is dead. And he had to bury them. And they gave him the shovel to do so. And he didn't really have a choice, because the other option would be that he would be dead. And so he took the shovel because he wanted to live. That was heartbreaking. And you could see that it broke Rosie because he couldn't comprehend that and all that was going on. And it's a hard pill to swallow. It's kind of getting me down, but like it's a rough sequence. It's a really hard sequence. And then Rosie says, may God watch over you and whatnot, and to the point where he's like, there's no God, basically, is what it sort of comes back to him. He essentially says that if there is a God, God has forgotten him. And it's that thing that sort of occurs when something like this happens, where you have faith-based people, and you may have been of faith, but then you question, like, you've put me through pure hell. This happens a lot of times where people question, how are people born out of slavery, who came out of slavery so strong within faith, that he's questioning, like, if God does exist, he's forgotten all about me. Like, God's not protecting me because I just went through pure hell. And for Rosie, that was just a gut wrench of a moment. And he almost missed his plane. He was getting pretty late to get on his plane after a couple of calls, but he finally gets on his plane. This is an important piece. It doesn't, one, I think the audience should see this because it gives a little bit more weight to exactly what the Nazis were doing, as opposed to it just being good guy versus bad guy. It clearly says that the Germans were doing some just gut wrenchingly awful stuff. But it shows what Rosie went off to go do. He went on to prosecute Nazi criminals, Nazi organized criminals, as he went along. So that was sort of his lot in life and what he decided to focus on as he continued on. You get that in the card. I won't tell everybody's cards because I think that's an important piece, and I think that's a fun sort of thing to watch and get through to. But his was important because it actually got brought up within the story of what we got here. So to set him on his path, and you see it here. The Germans and the POWs continue their trek on to yet another Stalag. At this time, that they're going to only go to 20 kilometers. That's sort of the rule, the guide that the American lead made with the German lead, and that's what they're going to do. But while they're traveling, and this is why they don't want to travel at night, they get shot on by a P-51, an American P-51, that in this moment just thinks that everybody down there is a German troop. And so the Americans don't want to shoot it because, like, our own people are shooting us. They don't know that we're down here because they can't see. They can't make anything out of this darkness. And you guys should not want to keep coming out here because they're shooting everything down now that's moving in the darkness. So we should get off of this path. And in them doing that, there's a sequence where Buck, George, and Bill take a leap over the wall, and they are able to sort of run and get away from the situation. Bucky wants to follow, but he gets caught before he can make that dash. And he gives cover to Buck. Bucky kind of keeps the gun up, take a couple of punches in the chest and stomach while they go free. So Buck, George, and Bill are off trying to make their way to find some type of ally or to find wherever these Russians are kind of encroaching so that they can meet up. There's a moment where they are resting, taking a sleep, and Buck and Bill are still asleep. George is taking a piss at a tree, and he gets attacked by a kid with a gun that has like the blade, like the musket blade, the blade on it. And he stabs him in the back, and then he stabs him in the chest and kills him. Buck and Bill wake up and then sort of de-arm the kids and get the one up on them and let them go. They don't kill them; they let them go, even though George is dead. At that point, that Bucky like looks at the gun and says, "Like these are empty. Like these are kids. They don't know what the hell they're doing." But it just shows you the desperation that the Germans have been on the up for so long that now that they're losing that, everybody is, even the kids are starting to like freak out and be like, "This isn't the norm. We need to do what we can to fight to hold on to this last vestige of power that we have." My understanding, and I've not read the books, I've not done anything with the documentary that sort of has come as a companion piece to this, is that this sequence, yes, Buck and Bill live, and George does die in this. Name might be different. How it occurred is not the same. It wasn't by kids, but I think it's done here for the effect to show you just how at a loss the Germans were in this moment. Buck and Bill do make it to some American allies. I think they're actually German, but it's not clear what their affiliation is, but I feel like they might find a Russian camp that actually takes them in after realizing that they're Americans. And then they put them on a plane and get them back to the base. So we do get Buck back home with Kraz and all of them. Before that happens, Rosie and Kraz have a sort of a heart-to-heart. Rosie and Kraz are chatting because Rosie's now back after his stint getting shot down. And celebrating, and Kraz tells Rosie that he's going to be a father with Jean, not with Sandra, with Jean. And Rosie's like, "Are you happy about it?" And Cross like, "Yeah," but it's not a genuine yeah. It doesn't feel like yeah. I don't believe you type of yes. But it becomes evident that it's not so much that he doesn't want the kid; he wants to be a father. He thinks he's not sure if he'll be a good one because this war has changed him, and he feels like the war has made a monster out of him by going to be the person to go murder and kill all these people, become this monster. I have sort of become that monster too. And he uses a saying, I can't, I'm going to butcher it now, but it's basically like a saying that if you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back at you and you just become one with it. That's not the correct way to say it, but you get what I'm saying. If you do monster like things long enough to stop the monster, you are now looked at as the monster. And in everybody's eyes, you are the monster. Now, this doesn't work that well with Rosie in this moment because Rosie just saw what it was that the Germans were doing. And he's like, we were the good guys. We were the ones doing what we were supposed to be doing. They are clearly the worst of the worst. And we did everything correctly. And so he kind of gives him a pep talk, shoot him back up. But it's true in this moment that Cross thinks this war has taken a toll on him. Both of the death, but that seems to have sort of alleviated a little bit with the return home and coming back and actually having some time with his wife. But now he's just like, I've got to go back and live a life now once this is finally over. And I don't know if I can, or if I'm going to be good at it, or if I'm not the human person that she used to know. So the rest of the POWs make it to another Stalag. This time, though, they're not even processed. They're just there. They open up the gates and they're just kind of there. And I'm like, oh, wait, what? This shows you how far they're falling down. And the Germans are just kind of like, we don't know what the hell is going on. Not even being processed. So they just kind of go about their ways. And all of a sudden, the P-51 comes, does a swoop, and starts firing on the German officers. Doesn't get anything the first time, but does another pass and does another firing on them. And this time it hits, does a lot of damage to the point where the Germans, the few towers that are still remaining, stop trying to shoot at the P-51 that keeps going swooping back and forth and start plucking out POWs on the ground. And so the POWs have to scatter, run. Basically now they are overtaking this Stalag. And so they start taking over German officers, start climbing up towers to knock out the towers, to get people out of the towers, to get them down. And then what eventually happens is once they're finally overrun and have overtaken everything, Bucky grabs the American flag and uses that, takes down the German Nazi flag and puts up the American flag and says, basically to showcase to the planes going by and to show everybody else that this is now an American property and the POWs have now overtaken this. Please come get us. Stop shooting on us. We're okay. We got it here. Come get us. And they do. They come and they rescue and free all the POWs from there. There's a moment where the American military comes to the German military and just says, the German military is like, give us some time. We're acquiesced. We're going to give you all of our weapons. And my man's like, you guys are dismissed. Just go. Just leave. Just get the hell up out of here. We're good. And so a celebration sort of occurs. Now that Buck is back, the last few days of the war are kind of these, take these, I don't know, food crates or food shelter, like packages to people, to allies, because there's been a lot of, in this war, has done a lot of stuff to crops and to all of those things. So Rosie and Buck get up into a plane together and kind of deliver this off. And this happens a couple of times, but in this one they show us because two things occur. One, as they are taking the plane out, they start crossing some German territory that has guns and whatnot pointed up. And they're kind of like, be on the ready. Because we don't know at this point, Germans have said that they're going to be a truce, but we don't know. But these Germans calmly let them go by, and they're like, okay, they've officially settled that down, so we can go ahead and hold this over. And then on the way back, trying to come back in, on the tower, you can hear Bucky is talking to Buck, and Buck hears it at first, and it's kind of like, is that you? And so the two of them are back together again. So those those help packages were going out like 1st of May, 1945. And then subsequently, about 6 or 7 days later, I think May 8th is when the president at the time passed an order saying that Germans have acquiesced, they have surrendered, the war is over. And so all these folks have to go back home, which life is going to be very different for all of them when they return home. And I think that's the biggest sort of takeaway that you have, is that this was just for these folks that survived. Most of them didn't. Many of them didn't. But for these folks that did survive, the life that they lived back home is going to be drastically different for multiple reasons. Some may stay in the war. Some may have, you'll see as the cards come up at the end, some stay in the war. Some decide to go back, return to go home to Detroit. Some start flight school. Some decide to do prosecution, but they all go their own way. I think one, I mentioned the Rosie piece of it, but the only other piece that was pretty interesting is that Bucky, unfortunately, is not long for the life of everybody else in this. Pretty much lives a longer life, except for Bucky. He makes it to 46 and is no longer with us at a pretty young age. I say that because I'm close to that age. I'm like, oh God, that's frightening. But yeah, that's the show. There's a companion show documentary that comes up that Spielberg and Tom Hanks are narrating, but I don't think I'm going to watch it. Yes, but I don't think you should have to watch that to sort of get the better pieces of this. I think at the beginning of this show, there were some very strong moments. I think the second half of this show did not do as well as the first half did, displaying the ups and downs of what it was for the Bloody 100th. I think once we got Bucky and Buck in the Stalag, the show sort of started spinning its wheels a little bit, and we were sort of in one place. The Tuskegee episode, now that I think about it even more, you probably could have done without it. Like, I love seeing the Tuskegee parts, but like, you could have just put the people of the African American people know their history. They know that Tuskegee Airmen were probably in this too. You could have just put them in place and not even have to. You spent an episode on that and didn't really give them anything to shine with. Because in this episode, they are nothing more than background characters. And so you set them up to mean something, for me anyway, and then they mean nothing really for this episode, for what we're doing for Masters of the Air. What they do in history means a lot. But it's just like, why do we take an entire episode to spend time with them if we didn't do the same with the Quinn stuff? Why did we not go back to them? Because those are far more richer and interesting characters than sort of what we sort of got out of the Buck and Bucky. We know that those two are tied at the hips and they're going to do everything for each other. And they know that this world, this time, these years that they spent in these Stalags, would have been a lot more difficult. Stalags and the war would have been a lot more difficult had they not been with the two of them. But all in all, good episode. I think if I'm ranking the three between the Pacific and the Band of Brothers and this would be at the bottom of the three of them. But there's some good stuff to pull away from this. I just don't know. Unlike Band of Brothers, which I think deserves a rewatch every once in a blue moon, war films are not something you actively should go back to rewatch just for your own mental. But I think there's a lot of character stuff that occurs in that war that doesn't really occur that much here. I would say that this is a show that asks the viewer to go do homework. And I think you would be a much better person and you would get more information if you did so, because there's a lot of stuff that gets sort of overlooked. D-Day just sort of becomes a gloss in this series. But yeah, I didn't mind watching it. I think towards the latter part, it became more of a chore to watch than it did at the beginning. I think the first few episodes, I was all in. And then it became, after the Quinn episode, it became more of a like, I'm already in it. I've already told you guys that I'm going to watch, so I'm going to keep on watching. And that's exactly what I did. But what did you guys think about part 9, the series finale of Masters of the Air? Go leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast with the same name. That's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere the place podcasts. We're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.